Okie dokie, I can start. Great. Good morning, or whatever time it happens to be, wherever you are. It's nice to be back giving class. It's been a while for me. So with these standalone classes, of course, it's a little bit easier to plan and a little bit harder in some ways because you don't have a lot of time to work out all the ideas that you want to talk about. So anyway, so today I figured for this class, I'm going to discuss this little gem, or a few verses, the first three verses of this Shri Shri Premadhama Deva Stotram by Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Deva Swami Maharaj, which is you're probably all familiar with, but we'll give a little bit of a eulogy or description of it for those who may not. So this Stotram, of course, is written in Sanskrit by His Divine Grace, who was a Sanskritist of considerable skill. If you haven't read his Sanskrit poetry, you are doing yourself a disservice. His Sanskrit poetry reminds me a lot of Krishnadas Kaviraj's, which is pretty high praise if one is familiar with Kaviraj Swami's poetry as well. So it's about 70 verses long, 72 actually, but not all of them are speaking about Mahaprabhu. The end verses are got the standard, this was composed in this year kind of thing. And I really like this poem because it's basically a concise rendering of Gaur Leela and Gaur Tattva into these verses that are pretty easily memorizable, at least, for me. I was able to memorize these first three verses without a lot of difficulty. It took me about a week. So, and they're really, I find verse format really useful because the second verse in particular of the three that we're going to discuss today is my favorite of the three because it's kind of like a mantra Mayu Upasana verse where you can just like meditate on this verse and you get this whole, it's not really, because it's not describing a Leela, but it's a nice meditation, let's put it that way. So Sridhar Maharaj says, Deva Siddha Mukta Yukta Bhakta Vrinda Vanditam Papa Tapa Dava Daha Dagdha Dukha Khanditam Krishna Nama Sidhutama excuse me, Dhanya Dana Sagaram Premadhama Devameva Nomi Gaura Sundaram. So the last line, of course, is the the refrain, or that line remains the same throughout the poem. Premadhama Devameva Nomi Gaura Sundara. So we're really getting new information with the first three lines of each verse, naturally. So anyway, he says, the translation is, all glories unto my golden Lord, Gaura Sundara, the beautiful, the divine abode of pure love, the Premadhama. And he's the Deva, the god of that. Demigods, the Devas, Siddha, Mukta, Yukta. The Muktas, the liberated people, Yuktas, the yogis, and Bhakta Vrinda Vanditam. Bhakta Vrinda, of course, is the entirety of the society of devotees. Vanditam. They're offering prayers. They all sing constantly in his praise. He removes at once the miseries of all tortured souls who are scorched by the heat of their own sins and consequently are burning incessantly within the great forest fire of the material world. Blessed is the Lord, who is a vast ocean of divine generosity, the abode of the sweet nectars that are the holy names of Krishna. So what we're going to see throughout in these three verses is that Sridhar Maharaj bases them, or his description is based squarely on, or really it's derived in large part from the Bhagavatam verse, 11th canto verse, where Mahaprabhu is covertly described. The Krishna Varnam Tvisha Krishnam Sangopam Gastraparshadam verse, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. So if the first thought that came to me when I was going through this and writing out my notes, which I actually did longhand, that kind of in a almost like a formal commentary format. And if anybody wants them, I can send them to them. So you've got these exalted beings, the demigods, perfected beings, siddhas, jivan muktas, and yogis. And these people, they're all paying respects to him. And what to speak of them, even other forms of Bhagavan, like even other forms of Bhagavan pay their respects to him. Bhaktivinoda Thakur informs us through his Navadvip Dham Mahatmya that Bhagavan Narsingadev every morning shows up to the Yogapith in Navadvip to pay his respects to Gauda Sundar. So this verse is establishing the ontology of Sri Gauda, establishing his position relative to all other beings. And even though Sridhar Maharaj doesn't say this here in the verse specifically, as I'm pointing out, other forms, we know from other places that other forms of Bhagavan are paying their respects to him. So that's giving us a clue as to his actual position. And we can extend it even further, and even in Gaur Leela itself, Sri Advaitacharya, in order to establish his position as subservient to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he at one point began to teach Mayavad in order to enrage Mahaprabhu, knowing that Mahaprabhu would chastise him, and thus demonstrating his superiority to Advaitacharya, which is a beautiful Leela, and very instructive to us, of course, for that reason. And so we know from that very clearly that Mahaprabhu is the supreme being. So another really interesting point that, at least interesting to me, that came to me while I was thinking about all this was, so these beings, the devas, the siddhas, etc., they're all in the mode of sattva, whereas the bhaktas are nirguna. And so the bhaktas of Gaur have no qualities constituted of the Maya Shakti, while they do have qualities constituted of the Sarup Shakti. So that's a huge distinction. In most, well, let's just say Gaudiya Vaishnavism is very, what's the word? I don't know if it's not unique, but it's very clear in just the difference between the qualities of the material world and the qualities possessed by divinity, and that the devotees are possessed of those qualities as well, which I will go into a little bit more later. So while we're in the sadhaka, or in the sadhaka deha, we're looking to examples. We look to the Guru, Sri Guru, the Goswamis, and other Vaishnavas who are of substantial spiritual standing. We look to them for which qualities to emulate. In other words, to become something other than what we are, or we have to, or to become a version of ourselves that is, let's say, different or better than where we are. We have to, one of the easiest ways to do that, if you are familiar with your Tony Robbins, some of you might be, anyway, the easiest way to become a particular way in the world is to model someone else who is like we want to become. And we see this throughout. This is not some high arcane principle. This is something that's very common to us. If you want to become a great athlete, you model yourself after athletes, or et cetera, et cetera. You want to become a great scholar? Well, you got to act like the great scholars do, and eventually you might become one. And the same as with qualities, or if we want to become a saintly person, we have to emulate those saintly qualities that the saints actually have. And so with such exemplars in our life, in our mind, then over time, by studying their character and by emulating their behavior, we become like them. Those qualities, the qualities that they possess will manifest within us. And as the Swarup Shakti begins to take a predominant role in our lives, and the Maya Shakti recedes. It's kind of like a scale. One goes up and the other goes down. So if the Swarup Shakti is increasing, then the Maya Shakti is decreasing, and vice versa. So hopefully we try to keep ourselves on the Swarup Shakti increasing side. At least until Sharanagati is fully in place, and then it's not something we really need to think about anymore. We're already, the engine has started, and we're absorbed at that point. And it's interesting, or I think it's important to point out that for an idea of what those qualities are, we can look to, we can find Krishna's qualities in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. We can find Radha's qualities in the Ujjvala Nilamani. And because knowing those qualities, knowing God's qualities, is essential for us to understand that is necessary for us to understand which qualities the Atma, or what the Atma will manifest when it's in prem with Krishna. So, like Kaviraj Goswami, well, actually Mahaprabhu through his Kaviraj Goswami's pen says that at the time Diksha Kale, at the time of Diksha, one gets a spiritual body. So, but the qualities of Krishna are not fully manifest in the sadhaka at that time. It takes time. So moving on to the second line. So that's all in the first line. That was just a couple of thoughts I had about that. So the second line, Gaura is Patita Pavana. So as you say, Papa Tapa. So sin, pop, top. Those who are burned by sin in the great forest fire. So by our own choices as conscious entities, as moral agents with a degree of free will, we act in relation to the Maya Shakti. And so when the jiva uses the Maya Shakti, and just so you know, the language that I'm using here with regard to the jiva tattva is, or the points that I'm making, some of them that I'll be making through this, and you might spot one of them later on. It's coming from a series of articles that Vrindaranya has written, and that she asked me, she graciously gave me the service to proofread for her, and also to, see if her arguments were sound, which they very much appear to be. So this language of the jiva using Shakti to interact with the world is, you don't commonly hear it spoken of like that, but through her erudite study of the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami, she has brought this point out. So anyway, this is a side note. So anyway, when the jiva uses the Maya Shakti to interact with the Maya Shakti, because the jiva can't interact, of course, directly, there's no possibility of that. the Maya Shakti is inert and the Jiva is a conscious, moving, alive thing. So it has to use some medium to interact with the Maya Shakti. It uses the Maya Shakti to do that. Anyhow, when it does so, excuse me, in an exploitative spirit, in a spirit of trying to enjoy for itself, then it brings reactions, both favorable and unfavorable. This is all basic Vedanta. And this creates an endless karmic cycle that is impossible to extract oneself from. And so, to illustrate just how dire the Jiva's predicament is, Sridhar Maharaj invokes Mahaprabhu's example of the forest fire of material existence that Mahaprabhu uses in the first verse of the Shikshastakam. So it's a pretty bad position to be in. If you're paying attention to any of the news these days around what's going on in the world in various places, you will know that there are many places on fire, literally on fire right now. And the fires are getting bigger and more intense every year. And so you can just imagine, like I've seen some of the pictures of there's a fire near Yosemite Park here in California. And the pictures are just insane. Just flames are just like, 50, 60 feet above the treetops. You can imagine if you were trapped in one of those, you're in trouble. So our moving in the world out of a desire to exploit the material energy burns us. The reactions from that burn us as if we were caught in one of these fires. Not a pleasant position to be in. But at the same time, performing vanditam, worship in a general glorification or worship in a general sense. If we performing vanditam, worshiping the supreme being in the form of Sriman Mahaprabhu of Gaur, that puts his fire out forever. Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam. Just like Mahaprabhu says in the verse. And further, that's on the beginning side or the lower side, and then the high side, it delivers unparalleled nectar. Pratipadam Purnamrita Svadanam. So this Gaur is a pretty extraordinary person, that he can not only destroy the reactions, he can put out this fire that is burning us forever, since forever, but he can deliver us into a position that is so far on the positive side that we have basically no conception of it. That's pretty extraordinary. And so how does he destroy this forest fire and bestow this highest ananda? The last line tells us, and Sridhar Maharaj says, he is the abode of sweet nectars that are the holy names of Krishna. And I really like the way he phrased that. It's the sweet nectars. So, of course, we know a bit about Nam Tattva, and so Sri Nam is the method of overcoming the Maya Shakti. And so Mahaprabhu, because he is, to use Sridhar Maharaj's, or to quote Sridhar Maharaj, a vast ocean of generosity from the translation, because he is that vast ocean of generosity, he distributes those nectars of Sri Nam freely to the fallen souls of Kali Yuga. Now, there's so many ideas here. Each one could be an entire lecture, but we're just kind of giving an overview kind of commentary. So, as Nam Prabhu purifies the sadhaka, this forest fire is extinguished, and then bhav arises, and ultimately praying for Krishna and for Gaur. And so Mahaprabhu, in the single practice of Sri Nam, he gives us both a method and a goal, which is extraordinary as well. So that was some thoughts I had on the first verse. Of course, as I said, we could easily make a whole lecture out of pretty much each line of these verses. And that's the beauty of verse format, is that there's so much information compacted into a very economical space. So verse 2. And this is, so this verse is just, it's amazing. He says, Swarna Koti Darpanabha Deha Varna Gauravam Padma Parijata Gandha Vanditanga Saurabham Koti Kama Murchitangri Ruparasa Rangaram Premadhama Devameva Naomi Goda Sundaram. Translation. The luster of his body, his fair body, is brighter than 1,000,000 brilliant mirrors of gold. Of such sweetness is the fragrance of his body that the aromatic lotus and the parijat flowers humbly offer their prayers of worship. Millions of cupids, shocked out of their pride, have swooned at his lotus feet, unable to bear the sight of his unparalleled beauty. His limbs are alive with the rasa moods of love that emerge and flow continually from his beautiful form. I sing with joy the unending glories of my sweet Lord, my golden Goda Sundara, the one and only divine abode of pure love. So you probably can see already what I'm talking about in terms of this being a wonderful verse to meditate on, just thinking of his form emanating this beautiful golden color. So of course this verse is mainly concerned with the form. So we had in the first verse a bit of ontology in terms of his position relative to other beings, and now Sridhar Maharaj, at least in the first half of the verse, he calls our attention to two specific characteristics of Mahaprabhu's form: his luster, his aura, and his scent, the fragrance that emanates from his body naturally. And so with regard to his effulgence, Sridhar Maharaj invokes the image, and it's a striking image. Like if you had 1,000,000 mirrors of gold, that's bright. That's very bright. In fact, I read somewhere at one point that I think it was Archimedes came up with a method of in warfare where he would take mirrors and place them on the shore, and as ships were coming, they would focus them and they would burn the ship. So obviously that's a pretty mundane way of using it, but it gives you an idea of just the intensity of what that focusing the light must be like. And so, millions of mirrors of gold, we can just imagine like how bright that would be. I mean, it would be completely unbearable to look at with the material eye, the naked eye. But we also know from the Sri Gita that Krishna's form is brighter than 1,000 suns, from I believe that's the 11th chapter. So, just one sun is enough to burn us up. If you've ever had a bad sunburn, you know what I mean. So one sun's enough to burn us, what to speak of 1,000. And yet the Shastra also tells us that Krishna's effulgence, or Mahaprabhu's effulgence, is, even though it is of such an intensity and brightness, luminosity, it's soothing and cooling like moonlight. So this is the one of the many paradoxes that just is naturally existing within God's being, that he's so bright, and from material estimation, you would expect that to be very painful or unpleasant at the very least. And yet we find it's the opposite. And so with regard to color, Krishna's aura is described by Sri Kaviraj Goswami in Govinda Lilamrita to be blue, and Radha's is golden, of course. And so he actually mentions that that when they're together, when Radha and Madhava are together, their auras mingle and they create this kind of greenish hue in the Kunj, or wherever they happen to be. That's an interesting description that I hadn't found anywhere else other than the Govinda Lilamrita. But in any case, Rasa Tattva informs us that in transcendence, in the Leela, emotions have corresponding colors. We've all heard this many times, as Guru Maharaj hasn't told us. And it just so happens that the color of compassion is gold. And so Radha is said to be the incarnation or the form of compassion in a way. And so Mahaprabhu, having assumed her bhav and being in the mood of Audarya, of freely distributing the himself, widely distributing, freely distributing the nectar of the holy name out of his infinite compassion. So all this to say that his color, the color, Mahaprabhu's color, as Sri Maharaj uses the words Deha Varna Gauravam, Deha, body, Varna. So Deha Varna, the Varna, the effulgence of his body, Deha is Gauravam, it's golden. So shastrically speaking, this is coming, well, this doesn't really come up from this is more coming from the implication or the word in the Bhagavatam verse, Tvisha Krishnam. So Krishna Varnam, Tvisha Krishnam. He's Akrishnam. He's not dark. So the opposite of dark would be golden. It doesn't say Shukla. It doesn't say white. So the Gaudiya commentary, I think it was Sanatan Prabhu, is the one who pointed out that Tvisha Krishnam should be interpreted to mean gold. So Sridhar Maharaj, of course, is following his lead here. And so that's a couple of words about his just meditating on his effulgence, just how beautiful that must be. Like to have a person who is beautiful in every possible way, and yet they've also got this aura, this divine aura coming off of them that is so pleasing. And not only that, he's got this fragrance that is just otherworldly. So many years ago, when I was in Vrindavan with Guru Maharaj and Vrindaranya, I had the opportunity to experience the scent of a blue lotus. We were staying in a house in Raman Reti, and Vrindaranya at one point went to, because we were going to be there for a while, she went and got some plants, and she wanted flowers for the deities and stuff. So anyway, one of the things she had was she bought a little tub of water and set up a little tub and had a blue lotus in there. And it's the most unbelievably subtle and rich fragrance I had ever experienced. And so Sridhar Maharaj invokes that here, that his fragrance it shames the lotus and the parijat. And the parijat, of course, is the mythical, or it's the flower supposedly of the demigods, of the divine realm of Indra. And there's a whole story around that of how Krishna stole it and whatnot and brought it to earth. But point being, the reason that Krishna was asked to do that was because the fragrance is so amazing that it had to be brought to earth. And so now, I don't know I've never experienced a parijat, but I can imagine it's pretty amazing. So as in all descriptions of the divine, we are left with only material examples or material phenomena to compare it with. And so this is what Sridhar Maharaj is doing here. He's using things that people know, or at least, I mean, in the case of the lotus, we definitely know, or we could have personal experience with, and the parijat, which is said to be this otherworldly fragrant flower. And he does this to give us an idea that Mahaprabhu's fragrance is of such a richness and a quality that these flowers, he says it's in a poetic way, their fragrance is just paying obeisance to his fragrance. That's kind of a common linguistic trope in these bhakti shastras and the bhakti literatures, or descriptions of God, is that the thing, it's just paying obeisances from a distance kind of idea. It's like I can't, my fragrance, the lotus and the parijat are thinking my fragrance is nothing in comparison to him. I can only pay my obeisances from a distance to that. So what must his fragrance be? And so between his effulgence and his fragrance, even though one could say that, at least on the effulgence side, I mean, it's kind of, it's Aishwarya, because you don't see, people normally don't exhibit golden auras as they walk around. And so to see someone that had that, you'd know that they were different. That's pretty abnormal, pretty extraordinary, I should say, not abnormal, normal for Krishna. Yet at the same time, it doesn't take away from his beauty, it enhances it. And the same with his fragrance. You can imagine just like, one of the qualities of Radha is Gandhon Marita Madhava. Gandha Unmarita Madhava, her fragrance, her bodily fragrance, Gandha. Unmarita maddens Madhava. And likewise, his does that, the same for her. So Mahaprabhu, being the combined form of Radha and Krishna, his fragrance is doubly maddening. And we hope that someday we'll catch a particle or an atom of that fragrance and we'll be maddened as well. The third line of this verse is important. It's especially significant because Gaura's beauty is of such a magnitude that Kamadev, Cupid himself, who bewilders all living entities with the prospect of experiencing beauty, is bewildered by his beauty, by Mahaprabhu's beauty. So if you have a being that is capable of bewildering everyone in the material world, and he himself is, as Sridhar Maharaj said, swooning at Mahaprabhu's beauty, then it gives us an idea of just how beautiful he is. And it's to the point that, or he is so beautiful that meditating on Mahaprabhu's beauty will ultimately make the sadhaka forget, like not just like overcome through force. Material world is not favorable, so I will consciously put that down. No. It's, you meditate on Mahaprabhu's beauty and you will forget the temporary and ultimately miserable lures of Kamadev. You'll see them, first of all, you see them for what they are and choose to consciously choose to no longer take part in them. And then ultimately, they're just not even consequential in one's consciousness. They're not even, like, the choice isn't even there. His beauty is so compelling that it would be like, well, the example from the Bhagavatam that Dhruva Maharaj gives is beautiful. When he tells Sriman Narayan after getting his um, after getting his darshan, or while he was having darshan, I think, does he say to him? I don't remember if he says to him or not, but anyway, he compares what he was looking for, a kingdom in the material world, as just some piece of broken glass on the ground, whereas Narayan himself is this most precious jewel you can conceive of. So that, this comparison, it's like the material manifestations may, if you look at them quickly at first glance, they may appear to be similar to a jewel, have qualities of this, beautiful reflectivity of the sun, and they might attract our attention. But then when you pick it up, you realize, oh, it's just a piece of glass. You throw it away. So Mahaprabhu's beauty isn't like that. Mahaprabhu's beauty is the jewel of jewels. And moreover, the devotee who becomes absorbed in Gaur swims in an ocean of rasa. So meditating on his beauty is compelling. And ultimately what that will afford one is to experience, as Sridhar Maharaj says here, Rupa Rasa Rangaram, that his form is continually emitting wave after wave of rasa. And because he's a Rasa Raj, it's all rasa, all the rasas relative to whichever devotee. So this is a pretty far out idea, which I've thought about over the years, and just it blows my mind every time how, for example, Mahaprabhu in the kirtan at Srivas Thakur's house, he's surrounded by his devotees, and they're all in different rasas with him, in Krishna Lila, I should say. So they're I should point out that in the Sadhaka Deha, the devotee in relation to Mahaprabhu is cultivating, or is in Dasya Rasa, servitude. As I pointed out, even Advaitacharya wanted to establish that fact, that point, and he did in inimitable fashion. And by doing so, one will ultimately be admitted into Navadvip Dham, and where we will experience Mahaprabhu's form as Ananda Chinmaya Rasa, as we find in the Brahma Samhita, verse 37, where Sri Vidinchi Brahmadev says, Govinda is rasa filled with spiritual bliss. This is from Jiva Goswami's commentary. So Govinda is rasa, filled with spiritual bliss. So rasa is well, that is a very, very big topic, of course, which we're not going to go into here. But suffice to say, so Sridhar Maharaj in his shorthand verse format, he's putting, like I said, a ton of information in here. And so Mahaprabhu's form is just emitting these waves of rasa, and by relating to him in Dasya, let's say we are successful in our endeavors to enter into the kirtan at the house of Srivas, and we're in the kirtan with Mahaprabhu and his associates, and he, through the kirtan, he, as we know from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Kirtana Prabhave Smarana Swabhave. So Smarana arises, remembrance of Krishna arises out of doing kirtan. And this is true for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. And he starts chanting the names, and he is transported into Krishna Lila. And the devotees go along with him. They're drawn there as well through the name, through the power of the name. And when they get there, they find that they're in our line, in Bhakti Vinod Parivar, one of two rasas, either Sakya or Madhurya. And so by surrendering to Mahaprabhu and Dasya, we find ourselves in a suitable Siddha Deha to taste that particular rasa in relation to Krishna in Krishna Lila, while also tasting rasa in Gaur Lila, Dasya rasa, but it's the Dasya rasa that's not the Dasya rasa of Vaikuntha, not at all, because it's completely devoid of Aishwarya. It's the Dasya rasa of Vrindavan, of Gaur Lila. It's Guru Maharaj describes it as bordering on friendship. In other words, you're a servant, but it's a very affectionate relationship with your master, the master who is affection personified. So something to look forward to. And then moving on to the third verse, Sridhar Maharaj elaborates here on the ontology of Gaur Tattva. So what does he say? Prema nama dana janya pancha tattva katmakam sangha divya parshadastra vaibhavavatarakam shyama gaura nama gana nritya matta nagaram Premadhama Devameva Naomi Gaura Sundaram. He expanded himself as the fivefold potencies of the Panchatattva in order to expedite the free distribution of the holy names of Krishna, leading to the attainment of Krishna Prem, the fifth end. So, Sridhar Maharaj is drawing a couple of meanings out of this word pancha. Pancha means five, of course. So he appears as the Panchatattva in order to distribute Premanam. And then he invokes, or he plays off of this word pancha, the five, to point out that Krishna Prem that arises out of chanting the name is the fifth end, the fifth goal of life. So we've got Dharma, Artha, Kam, Moksha. Those, classically speaking, are the four goals of life in the Vedic conception of life. And Mahaprabhu's Nam Dharma, Prema Dharma, is said to be the fifth goal of life beyond those other four. It's even beyond Mukti itself. So in the first line, Mahaprabhu here is pointing out that look at my notes here. So he appeared as the Panchatattva, and now that's a big topic, of course. And, we could give many lectures on the Panchatattva, but the basic idea of the Panchatattva, of course, is that they, as Kaviraj Goswami describes, they plundered the storehouse of love of God in order to distribute it freely, distribute it without discrimination to the fallen souls of Kali Yuga. That's the basic idea of the Panchatattva. That's what they do. That's their main focus. So yeah, their focus, of course, is, well, first to taste the name themselves. And one could make the case that you can't effectively distribute the holy name unless you're actually tasting it. So they are tasters. They are rasikas of the highest order. And out of their compassionate nature, they are distributing that, as we heard in the first verse, the nectars, the sweet nectars of the holy name to everyone. Because that name, as Sridhar Maharaj is pointing out here, is Premanam. So it's not typically in Kali Yuga, the avatar is Gaura Narayan, And of course, the Dharma for the age is kirtan. And so kirtan of what? God's names. But those names, when given by Gaur Narayan, the conception that those names will bring us to is not Golok or Navadvip, it's Vaikuntha. And so Sridhar Maharaj makes the distinction here, Premanam. So Prema refers only to love of God in the most intimate and the most fullest aspect, which we find only in one place, in the Vrindavan, Navadvip Vrindavan. This like doesn't exist anywhere else in the Paravyom. So Premanam, that because that prem is not different from that conception, then the name that delivers that, he's pointing that out, that's the kind of name that the Panchatattva is distributing. It's not the name that's aimed at mukti, it's the name that's aimed at prem, Gaur prem, Krishna prem. So in the second line, Sridhar Maharaj points out that Mahaprabhu appeared in the world Sangha. Like this one word is like so much in that. Sangha Divya Parshadastra Vaibhavavatarakam. So again, he's echoing the language of the Bhagavad verse. Krishna Varnam, Tvisha Krishnam, Sango Pangastra Parshadam. So here we have Parshadastra, same idea, Parshada and Astra. So he descends, avatar, along with his Vaibhav. So Vaibhav is described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita by Kaviraj Goswami. Vaibhav Prakash is the technical term, and it's an expansion of Krishna for pastimes. It's similar to himself, but not quite the same, different in emotional temperament. And the example that Kaviraj Goswami gives there in the, let's see, anyway, I forget where it is. It's in the Madhya Lila, Adi Lila chapter 2. He says that the primary, or the example he gives there is Baladev. So Baladev is a Vaibhav Prakash of Krishna. In other words, he's a manifestation of Prakash of the type, the Vaibhav type. So he's a manifestation for pastimes. So he's basically God in another form so that God can play with himself in Vrindavan, in the rasas of Sakya and Dasya and Vatsalya. So Sangha, but this first word Sangha really struck me, and I spent a considerable amount of time thinking about that, the implications of it, and from a Vedantic perspective, it is profoundly significant. So Mahaprabhu appeared in the world not only in his personal form, but he appeared with all of his expansions, Sangha. He doesn't come alone. As Srila Prabhupada pointed out many times, Krishna is never alone. So this means that Krishna, Mahaprabhu, he's not only Brahman, he's Parabrahman. So in the Gita, we find a distinction between Brahman and Parabrahman. Krishna says, Brahmanohi pratishtaham. I am the basis of Brahman. So there's a distinction between Krishna's form, the personal aspect of Godhead, Bhagavan, and Brahman, his halo or his effulgence. So we have to understand that Parabrahman, the supreme Brahman, it's kind of like, the word Brahman means the great spirit, basically, to use Native American terminology. So para is a prefix that means something is like the ultimate. And so Bhagavan is not just Brahman, it's the supreme great spirit, which, due to the variegated and love saturated and supremely tasteful leelas, excels Brahman, the Brahman feature of Godhead, in all possible ways, in all respects. Why? Because in Brahman, there's no service, there's no love, therefore, right? So love is based on service. Divine love is anyway. Or actually, I should say any true love is based on service. The desire to give oneself to one's object of love. And so in Brahman, there is no service, there's no love, therefore. And why is that? Because there is no second identity present for any exchange to take place between. There's just one. The jiva who enters into Brahman, who actually successfully does that, which is extremely rare, but it's possible, by doing sadhana with the goal of attaining Brahma Sayuja with some sort of bhakti admixture in one's sadhana, then one can attain that. And for the jiva who does that, this discrete conscious entity no longer has a sense of identity with which to experience anything. It's kind of like it's just there. Like the jiva's inherent shaktis either remain completely unmanifest, or they manifest only to a minute degree suitable for the environment of Brahman, which, considering that there's no shakti there in Brahman, it's qualityless. It's just so the jiva's will is dormant because he's not acting in relation to anything other than himself. He just simply is. And now, for those of us who have embraced Mahaprabhu's ideal, the idea of this is just like, why would you do that? It's not even, doesn't make any sense. But if you're familiar with the shastras that are promoting bhakti, a lot of times, a lot of time is spent by various acharyas pointing out this distinction in order to solidify people's faith in the path of bhakti. And in following that vein, I expanded on that point a fair bit. So the Bhagavan aspect of Godhead is so far beyond Brahman that there's hardly even language for it. You can't say much about Brahman, right? I mean, it's not like, as Guru Maharaj has pointed out, it's a good point, because it's like, oh yeah, in Jiva Goswami's Shat Sandarbha, the 6 Sandarbhas, you don't find a Brahman Sandarbha. It just doesn't exist. Why? Because there's not much you can say about it. So the distinction between Brahman and Bhagavan has often been made in the Shastra by comparing the bliss one experiences in relation to one of the other, or there's no relationship to Brahman, but the bliss of Brahman compared to the bliss one experiences in bhakti is, the example is often, the example is often given of the bliss of Brahman as compared to the water in the hoof print of a calf, which isn't much. And that example is also invoked in a different context to say that one who takes to the path of bhakti crosses over the material existence as if stepping over the water in the hoof print of a calf. But this is, excuse me, this is a bit of a different, obviously this is a different, using that same example to make a different point, which is that the bliss of Brahman is like the water within the hoof print of a calf compared to, what does Rupa Goswami call it? Bhakti Rasa Amrita, Sindhu, an ocean of Bhakti Rasa. the ocean of bliss that is bhakti, from Sevananda, bhakti Sevananda. So the quality of bliss that we will experience in bhakti ananda is oh yes, that's the point I was looking for in my notes here. So the bliss of serving Mahaprabhu in his Sankirtan is as far beyond Brahman as Brahman is beyond conditioned life. So if you take conditioned life and you compare it to Brahman, and Brahman is like orders of magnitude beyond. It's just like, well, obviously it's not a fair comparison, of course, because you're comparing a material life. Well, okay, so compare the when you get right down to it, the misery of material life with the bliss of Brahman. How different that is. Well, the bliss of bhakti is as far or even further beyond Brahman, the bliss of Brahman. So that's a pretty big distinction that we need to understand as Vedantins, if we are in order to understand clearly what we're involved in here. And oh yeah, so Sridhar Maharaj is, as I pointed out, he's invoking the language, or he's deriving his language from that Bhagavat verse, and he refers to his Divya Parshadastra, his divine eternal associates and his weapons. So Sriman Narayan, of course, you see him depicted, he's always got his weapons. He's got his conch, Sudarshan Chakra, and the club, the mace, and the lotus. And so these weapons, they all signify different shaktis within him that are used, or that he uses to perform different tasks, or to do different things. Excuse me. But Mahaprabhu doesn't have weapons like that. And so it's been described that Mahaprabhu's weapons are his upraised arms, by which he's attracting people to his Sankirtan. So he avatar, he descends along with, yes, or I made that point, pardon me. I didn't say though that so in Gaur Lila he descends. Actually, I should reiterate this point because I didn't point this out. But so he descends along with his Vaibhav, and the Vaibhav in Krishna Lila being Baladev, then in Gaur Lila that is Nityananda Ram, of course. So, and his sole occupation was to assist Mahaprabhu in his preaching of Nam Dharma. So, and his weapons are rather than I think the point has been made, I forget where, by whom, but his upraised arms, rather than destroying, like Krishna comes, it is said, or he himself says, that he comes age after age to destroy the impious elements within human society. And he does that literally with weapons in many cases. And so Mahaprabhu, being an incarnation of mercy, does not do that. His weapons are his upraised arms, by which he's destroying the impiety of the jivas through the chanting of the name. So we're getting a pretty good deal in Mahaprabhu. He's not coming to just crush us because we're sinful rascals, as it were. He's actually giving us not only the means to overcome our our misplaced values, our anarthas, to expunge these things from the heart. But he's given us the opportunity to live with him forever. And the third line is particularly sweet because, Sridhar Maharaj, what does he say? Mahaprabhu is dancing in the streets like an ordinary citizen. Curious. So God himself, in his most complete form, mingles freely with his devotees and ordinary people in the streets, chanting the name throughout the streets of Navadvip. In other words, he's not sitting on a giant throne like Narayan and accepting worship. And no, he's just a simple Brahmin. And he's not exhibiting godly opulence. Again, this is Krishna we're talking about, Gaur Krishna. So there's no Aishwarya there. Although there are instances, of course, in Gaur Leela where he does manifest some, just like in Krishna Leela, Brahma Vimohan Leela, anyone? In Gaur Leela, an example of his manifestation of Aishwarya would be the Mahaprakash, where he's sitting on the asan and he's revealing his devotees' internal or alternate identities in Krishna Leela. So that's Aishwarya, because then they know he's God. But as happens, or as it happens in Krishna Leela, where whenever the devotees get a sense of Krishna's godhood, rather than it diminishing their love for him, it augments it. Oh, he's God, but he's still my friend, child, lover, whatever it happens to be. How wonderful is he? And it inflames it, udipana, it inflames their love rather than diminishing it. Whereas in other flavors of love of God, such as Arjun's, when Krishna's godhood is made known to him, it diminishes his love. It causes his love to recede somewhat, as we find in the 11th chapter of the Gita. And Krishna reveals himself to Arjun, and Arjun asked for forgiveness for being too familiar with him, for being acting in a friendly way with him. But of course, we know that Krishna prefers that, having Arjun groveling at his feet, asking for forgiveness and please don't kill me and whatnot. That's, I'm sure, nowhere near or as tasty to Krishna as just sitting on the bed with Arjun, and Arjun is treating him just like his buddy. I mean, I know which one I would choose if I was God. So anyhow, that is what I had in mind for today. I've actually gone a little bit over time. And if anyone has any questions, we can entertain those or comments or whatever. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Haribol. Let me see here. How do we trying to unmute you?
Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for this class.
Oh, thank you.
These are so nice, these verses of the Premadhama Stotram. So I really appreciate you opening up some of these for us. Thank you very much.
You are always chanting every year for Gaura Purnima, are you? All the verses. You.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
you do. Oh, you chant the whole thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a little while, but it's very blissful.
Worth it. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, it's so beautiful that Sridhar Maharaj has given us this such a compact retelling of Gaur Leela. It's so convenient that you can basically go through his entire Leela in just a few verses like that. Yeah, it might take a couple of hours if you chant it out like that, but you know, you can, like I said, the compact nature of the verse format is like you could read this and then just have like the whole Gaur Leela just in your mind, just like think of a verse and you're right there. So yeah, that's one of my favorites for sure. Frodo. Okay, well, if there's no other questions or comments, then I guess I'll sign off and I wish you all a wonderful day. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha.
Citta Hari Prabhu ki
Jai
jai.
Jai.
All Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.